Welcome to this journey where we dialogue with thought and heart leaders to share their reflections on human condition and how to improve them.
So Derek, it would be interesting to know this person who's in front of me right now, who's so very energetic, so very vibrant. How was he like a child?
Wow. I think, wow, that's a good question. What was I like a child? Yeah, I think I was all over the place. I think in a very uncontrolled way, probably vibrant and energetic and into everything and trying everything. Very, very curious. Very particularly curious about how things work, how the world works, how people work, and so terribly insecure that always trying to find a way to draw attention and positive attention to myself. So, which is a classic Irish Catholic thing. So I think that was, I would say I was a fairly energetic, very vibrant, not particularly self-confident young guy and child that was in perpetual motion. Yeah.
Super. And how did this snowball into your teenage years?
Again, wow, teenage years. I think there's something, I don't want to be fair to or unfair to my own race and my own people, but I think there is something about the era that I grew up in as an Irish Catholic that informed who I was in my teenage years. And again, there was that insecurity, that uncertainty, that inability to take any pride in anything that I did particularly well, and a fantastic ability to find fault with anything I did. So I would say in the teenage years, yeah, buzzing and excited, but really inside questioning myself all the time, wondering whether I was worthy, wondering whether I was good at anything. Was I bright enough? Was I good looking enough? Would anybody ever want to spend time with me? Would I ever get a girlfriend? Would I ever pass exams? So probably classic teenage angst, but to me it feels like a particular Irish Catholic version.
And would Derek of today be, if Derek of today was advising Derek of teenage years, would he recommend emotional intelligence as important early skills to pick up?
Oh my God, yes. Oh my God, yes. I mean, if you look at emotional intelligence, not in that stiff, academic, overanalyzed, bookish way that it's often discussed. And you look at emotional intelligence as simply being the oil that lubricates the connection between people. Well, then everybody has to have it, and the earlier they have it, the better. I mean, the reality is people talk about lots of definitions of emotional intelligence, but it's really, for me, it's really simple. Okay, and it comes down to a mantra that I will share with anybody who cares to listen, and that is the way you show up and the way you behave determines the way people feel. The way people feel determines the extent to which they engage with you, and it actually determines the extent to which they can engage with you, because obviously the way we're feeling has a big impact on the way we behave and the way we can engage with people. And then finally, the extent to which we engage, people engage with you, is the extent to which that engagement or that relationship is successful or otherwise, whatever success means. So the way you show up determines the way people feel. The way people feel determines the extent to which they engage with you. The extent to which they engage with you determines the outcome of that engagement. So that means that emotional intelligence is simply understanding that the way you behave is important, and then stopping for a beat, taking and making decisions of how do I want to show up in this situation? Who do I want to be with this person? How do I want to land on this person? And that for me is emotional intelligence. So if you go back and you say with the Derek of today, would the 60-year-old say to the 16-year-old that emotional intelligence is important? I would say it is the single most important skill set for them to start develop. Because once you can interact with people in a positive and productive way, you can start at 62 and just recognize that simple truth. And you don't even have to change anything. Self-awareness. There was Fritz Perls said, awareness is curative. Once you know, and once you've heard that mantra, the way you show up determines the way people feel. The way people feel determines the extent to which they engage, etc. Once you've heard that, you cannot unhear it. And once you've heard it, already your world begins to change. Once you know that the way I show up matters, everything changes. And if every single person in the world recognized that the way I show up matters, it'd be an entirely different world. Entirely different world. Just that recognition, just that awareness, even before they change anything. So yes, I would tell 16-year-old and 6-year-old Deiric, the most important thing you can learn is how to be more emotionally intelligent in your interactions with people.
Fantastic, Deiric. I think that sets a great ground for discussing it further. So in some of my readings, I came across a thinker called Jonathan Haidt. He's a social psychologist from NY Stern School of Business.
Okay.
He's recently written a book called The Coddling of the American Mind.
Yeah.
The gist of the book is he says that there's a whole generation starting from late 90s till now, who've literally been not exposed to skills that would help them build resilience.
Okay.
He also tries and quotes Nassim Taleb, where he talks about antifragility. Now, the point he's making is when children, when they play, when they interact with each other, when they have disagreements, they even fight, they have arguments, and when they settle things for themselves, they learn the muscle of interaction in some different way.
Yeah.
And now, because we are caught on social media, we're not interacting with people in person, we don't go out that much, people are losing this muscle. Now, I didn't study him much to see whether he's then calling emotional intelligence as a remedy, but given that this information is available to you, do you then think having the emotional intelligence could help people become more resilient, more anti-fragile, and hence put them so that people don't feel people feel more comfortable showing up even in the difficult circumstances?
Yeah, I understand exactly what he's talking about when he talks about coddling and the way kids and even adults are being coddled now, because my wife was a school teacher for 35 years of her life. And when we were growing up as kids and when she was early in her career, if you got into any difficulty at school, the automatic assumption of your parents when the note went home was, you must have done something wrong. And so they came to the school with that attitude. And sometimes they were right and sometimes they were wrong, but that was the attitude they came with. The modern attitude on this side of the world, when a teacher complains to a kid or the kid gets in some trouble, the model coddling attitude of the parent coming to the school is one of defense. And is one of, my child wouldn't do that, and don't you talk to my child like that, and how dare you imply that my child X, Y, Z. And so that sort of coddling is creating a generation of emotionally dumb people. And I don't mean dumb as in dumb as a brick. I mean emotionally dumb as in they have no feel for that, because people are stepping in and telling them and not allowing them to deal with their own challenges. You got the other situation, and I haven't read that book, but I dare say it refers to the fact that since the 90s, everybody, you go to the United States, and it leaked over into our culture as well, that when there was a competition at school, everybody got a prize. You know, so there were 27 people in it. Even the 27th person got a prize, because you couldn't have somebody being left out and you couldn't have somebody feeling bad. When the reality is that in the world, you know what, there are going to be days when you feel like crap. when you feel really, really bad, and you have to learn to be able to deal with that. And coddling people into thinking, it was a race, and 27th is better than 28th is part, and it's just a small part of that whole process. So if you look then and you say, and you look at emotional intelligence as a skill set, and that, by the way, emotional intelligence is just what we call it in this current era. Okay, emotional intelligence has always been there. I mean, in your culture, for 2,500 years, people have been developing through various practices, some of which fall under the mindfulness label, have been developing emotional intelligence in themselves and in people around them. The skill set has always been there, even the label hasn't been there. And that skill set is very simple. It's awareness of oneself, awareness of the way the world and one's feelings and emotions and the things that happen to it are impacting me and the way I'm reacting to it, and awareness of other people, and then the ability to take that data and make decisions about how do I interact with other people, how do I influence other people, what's the right thing, and right doesn't always mean nice. What's the right thing to do in this situation. So I think, if you give people a set of skills like that, well, then they can deal with a huge amount of things. And some of those skills used traditionally, at least on this side of the world, a small subset of them, used to come from the religion. It used to come from our religious instruction. Would reflect a certain amount of this. I mean, the fundamental precepts that you see in Buddhism and Hinduism, and if you go into early Christian and Muslim teaching, the fundamental awareness of oneself, awareness of others, respect for oneself and others, and so on and so forth, is encoded all into that. And some of it made it true to the modern era, and so people like me got it beaten into us as part of our religious education. With the disappearance on this side of the world, at least, of the really heavy influence of religion, which I am delighted about in one way, unfortunately, that grounding has also disappeared with it as well. There's kind of a vacuum. So I do. I think if you teach people how to be more emotionally intelligent, they become better people. They become better parents, better partners. They become better humans. They become more able to deal with themselves in a kind way. And when people can deal with themselves in a kind way, they can deal with others in a kind way. And when they deal with others in a kind way, you change worlds. Well, a long-winded answer, but yeah, I think a lot of what's wrong with this world now is a lack of awareness of others and self-awareness, and then the inclination to act upon that awareness to do, if you want to call it, the right thing.
Super. On one end of the spectrum, where you coined the term, and not in a derogatory way, but you did nuance it by saying the emotional dumb kind of people who are not able to channel their emotions, who are not able to label, understand, channelize their emotions. And then the other extreme, you have political leaders who totally understand how their emotion, or at least some bit understand their emotions, but they do understand how people's emotions work. And they fan the sentiments.
Yeah.
And we find ourselves in a world where we see depolarization in politics. And I think one of the major reasons is people responding from their intuitions, from their emotions, without reflection. How do you see this thing? Because on the one side, you have this set of people who are not getting trained, or who are not realizing this, and the other side are people who are, if I may use the word sociopath or psychopath of a different order, who try to fan these sentiments and move people in a certain direction.
Yeah, I mean, you've always had, the human race always had and always will have a challenge for as long as we have our limbic system, our emotional brain. We're always going to have the challenge of people acting out against emotional impulses that go unquestioned. And There's always going to be a need for teachers to help people to become more self-aware, to notice what's going on emotionally, and to understand what information is given them, etc. And that will always be there. But I think the more insidious one is the second part of your question, because if you look at emotional intelligence, as I say, is the ability to recognize that the way you show up determines the way people feel. The way people feel determines the extent to which they engage, and the extent to which they engage determines the outcome of that engagement. If that's the case, it's something which is neither good nor bad. It just is. And it can be used for good or bad. And good or evil are kind of that close together on the spectrum. So you take somebody who understands that the way I show up determines the way people feel. Most of the time when people like you and I talk about that, we're talking about in the positive context, the assumption being that if I knew that the way I showed up determines the way people feel, that I would show up in a way that would make them feel more altruistic, more positive, more upbeat, more relaxed, less stressed, etc. But the reality is there will always be people, and have always been people in the world, who will have that understanding and will use it for nefarious ends. And who will understand exactly that the way they show up can, for example, incite an entire nation to hate part of their population, or to hate another nation, or to hate another religion, or whatever. And so that skill set can be used for good or ill. Okay, and you look at any of the tyrants, any of the dictators, even you pick any of them. You pick one of the biggest dictators that everybody in the world knows, Adolf Hitler. Okay, and I've often heard people say, "Have you ever seen a less emotionally intelligent guy?" And the people who say that, they don't understand it. That guy was probably one of the most emotionally intelligent people on the planet. He understood exactly how people worked. He understood how their emotions worked, and he purposely, intentionally, and without conscience used it for nefarious ends. And now you look to the modern age, and I'm not going to pick on any particular politicians anywhere in the world. You don't have to look far away from me. You don't have to look far away from you. You look into most of the major continents, and in there are 2 or 3 dictators or 2 or 3 people at a really high political level who are using their understanding of emotional intelligence to drive the world in a really negative way. And once again, they will always exist. What you can do, however, is you can improve the awareness of people so that they understand what emotional intelligence is, they understand the way it works, and then they can see more easily in behind that curtain of the Wizard of Oz and see the person who's operating the strings there and understand, hang on a second, this guy is working me. This guy is making me hate these folks, this religious group, this national group, etc. And so you shine that light of awareness. You give people a greater sense of emotional intelligence. You shine that light into that dark room, and all the cockroaches run for the dark corners of the room. And that's the best hope that we have, is that you can just shine enough of that light of awareness that people at least know they're being manipulated.
I picked up 2 things that you mentioned in the first answer when we were talking about the coddling of the mind, and the second one where we were talking about the psychopaths actually weaponizing emotional intelligence in some way. There were 2 quotes: "What's the right thing to do?" And the second, "the thin line between the good and the evil." How does one gain this insight of the right thing to do and the line between the good and the evil by constantly being at it in terms of practicing self-awareness, metacognition, mindfulness, emotional intelligence? How do you think this could be cultivated over a period of time, which means good ethics?
Yeah, I think let me just rewind, and I'll come to that in 1 second. One thing I just want to pick up on in what you said, and I think it's really important. The psychopath and sociopaths, they have very particular definitions. And I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to dive into the definition, but there are very specific definitions. And one of them, one of the aspects of that is the complete inability to empathize and to be able to feel into another person's experience. There are people in the world who are not sociopaths and not psychopaths, who have intentionally chosen a path who have the ability to empathize, who have the ability to feel into how other people are feeling, and despite the fact that they have that ability, choose to use that emotional effect, if you like, and that emotional contagion to drive people in a way that helps them meet their own nefarious ends. So, to a certain extent, I think sociopaths and psychopaths, they are victims of whatever it is that puts somebody there, whether it's their DNA combined with nurture or epigenetics or whatever it happens to be. But there are a lot of folks in the world who don't have the excuse of being a psychopath and a sociopath, who still drive people and drive the world in that direction. In answer to your question, how do you with that practice? I mean, one of the real dangers of mindfulness practice, if it's not balanced and not done properly, is it can actually have the opposite effect to the one that we intend, and you can become, and I talk from my own experience, you can start to become much more self-centered, and instead of self-aware, much more self-absorbed, and much more caught up in yourself, and so on. So I think the way that has to be balanced is with, you do that work, which is about building one's own emotional self-awareness. But you also do the work of building a sense of just how much everybody else in the world is like us. So that with practices like they would talk about in the mindfulness world, like metta, sort of loving kindness, where you're recognizing that everybody else is just like me, they suffer just like me, they're challenged just like me, and that they deserve to be as happy as I would want for myself. And so I think if you can help people to develop a sense that everybody in the world is just like them, that they've had good times just like them, that they've had bad times just like them, and that they deserve to be as happy and as healthy as we feel we deserve to be, well, then suddenly again, you have a shift, you have an entirely different world. So those practices, if they're balanced, I think can be, hugely beneficial in creating that sort of world. But I saw a Pope movie a while ago, and I can't even remember what it was, but it was an Asian martial arts style movie. And the guy who was the mega assassin, the most evil guy in the movie, what did he do before he went out to fight the least evil guy in the movie? He sat down and he meditated. And he focused, and he brought his focus, and he centered himself, and so on and so forth. So we have to be careful not to think that the practices alone change things. The practices have to be directed in towards a sense of that greater humanity, of belonging to something bigger than ourselves, and intentionally creating in ourselves the world that we want to create outside of ourselves. And that is a world where we are welcomed as much as anybody else, and anybody else is welcomed as much as we are.
I think that is a beautiful answer, Derek. Actually, you invoked a couple of more interesting nuance here. What I heard you say was there are that these things could be weaponized by people, because at the end of the day, in of themselves, they do not have ethics. We impart them ethics over a period of time. I'm also reminded of one of the works that is happening. There's a researcher called Willoughby Britton, who's doing work on the maladaptive states of users of contemplative practices.
Okay.
And fairly well researched paper, and it's widely circulated. I'm also reminded, I'm not getting the researcher's name right, but there are people also doing research on emotional intelligence and certain maladaptive states that could result in this. Now, one aspect of maladaptiveness could be the weaponizing of it for self-interest. The other could be it puts people in overthinking, overanalyzing, over-attending mode that could paralyze action. So how would you respond to these two strands? That could be the potential outcome. While it is not intended, while people like you who are doing things with pure intent do not intend such things to happen, but these could be an outcome. Could you speak to that?
You know, I could, but I don't think I'll have a very satisfying response for it, because there is no doubt, that, and I haven't read it. I've read a couple of papers that talk about the negative side effects of mindfulness, and not even maladaptive, but just the negative side effects. And I think when you start looking at the maladaptive side of things, it's important that it's studied. But my sense again is that what you have to do is, I think you have to, actually, let me be cliched and let me quote your countryman. You have to be the change. You can't be focusing, saying, oh, do you know what? There are people over there using this for nefarious ends, and what if, and what if, and what if. What you have to do is say, okay, what can I do? And what Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. And I think that is the answer, because one of the things that happily we see in our world around us, for all of the bad things that are going on, it is at least my sense that there are much more people who want to be the change than people who want to maladapt these ideas and these philosophies and so on. So in general, there always tend to be more good guys than bad guys, but the bad guys, of course, get the press. I think instead of focus upon how do I fight the negative side of things and the dark side, you focus on how do I enhance the bright side. And I think the only way we can do that is ourselves, as individuals.
Brilliant. And I heard Steven Pinker in you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because Steven Pinker's recent book, Enlightenment Now, is exactly making the case for reason, science, humanism, and progress. When he goes on to cite statistics after statistics, how as human beings, we are much better off than we were 200, 300, and thousands of years ago.
Sure. Yeah.
And I see that coming from you, that sense of optimism, that press, what bleeds leads, is what the press is largely focused on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the good things don't get talked about. Like your conference would not generally be covered by a mainstream, because you're promoting something which is
exactly right. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great answer, Deiric. Thank you so much for that. One last question before we close. Actually, two of them, and we'll try to quickly wrap them up. I heard from a few researchers. There's a gentleman called Richard Baldwin who's studying the impact of technology and artificial intelligence in times to come.
Okay.
And he's of the view that we outsourced hands first to the machines. Now we are outsourcing heads to the machine, the cognitive. Now what's left is heart. And I think in future it's going to be the care economy, the heart economy, which is where emotions play a very important role. So do you see the same optimism around the possibilities of more heart-based economy coming to mainstream?
Yeah, I really do, and a lot of the commercial research that's been, I say commercial, a lot of the research that has a commercial bent, that's been published in the Wharton Review and published in the Harvard Business Review and Fortune and places like that, does tend to suggest that as we move into this so-called fourth industrial revolution, and as we ascribe or pass off or delegate off to machines more and more complex thinking sort of tasks, that what's been left to us are the things that are very peculiarly and particularly human. And that is the ability to empathize, the ability to inspire, the ability to feel into somebody's experience, and so on and so forth. All of the things that are at the core of our humanness, and that are really emotional intelligence. And as we're freed of the shackles, by our machines, and we're freed of the shackles of the need to be so focused on routine thinking stuff, I think we are moving into an age when, we have the bandwidth and the awareness to become ever more emotionally intelligent, because we have to. Because to survive in this new world, the skills that are going to make us survive and thrive are those human skills. Because even as a doctor, when I was growing up, my mother wanted me to be either a doctor, a priest, or a civil servant, because those were the three things that would sustain you right from your 20s right through to when you passed away. And they were absolutely solid, safe positions. Oh, the other one was the bank. The bank was always a good place to work. Well, the bank was the first one to go. And so bank tellers from when I was 20, when a guy working in a bank was, he could walk on water. He was made for life. In a half a generation, bank tellers became shop assistants, essentially, with no disrespect to bank tellers, but the importance of the role because of the machines went down. Now, increasingly, it's hard for me to get in front of a general practitioner in my country. Whole lot of reasons to do with demographics and young populations and people retiring and all that sort of thing. So increasingly, I am getting my medical assistance over Zoom. And so it's a very, very small, right now, my health insurer has me interact with their system before I get talking to somebody online. And I'm interacting with what appears to be a form, but it's not a form, it's an artificially intelligent system. And it's kind of filtering and it's trying to find all the common stuff. And and sometimes I don't even have to be passed on to speak to somebody human. Now, you look at that, the doctor as we knew them, on this side of the world, that's gone. And gone with it as well, by the way, is the poor bedside manner that so many doctors this side of the world had, because only the most intelligent could get into medical school, and they weren't always the most emotionally intelligent. They weren't always the best people for the job from any perspective except technical. And then you look at the priest. Okay, the priest is the priest is the priest. It's hard to replace him with technology or her with technology. But you look at what's been left behind. What's been left behind for us humans is the real human work. And as we realize that the way we show up determines the way people feel determines the extent to which they engage, we start to notice that we have we have an opportunity, and that is become more self-aware and more emotionally intelligent or die. Okay. So what I see, you said earlier on that I sound like Pinker. I think the reason that we have this perception that we live in the most brutal, awful, terrible age that we've ever lived in, when the stats actually decry that completely, I think the reason we think that is because our self-awareness, and we don't have the self-awareness of the self-awareness, is becoming greater. And we're becoming more aware of all the bad things that are going on around us. And so we're turning up the volume on that self-awareness. And I think when we go a generation forward and we have a generation or a generation and a half, and we have machines or even robots that will interact with us, read our facial expressions, and even mimic emotional intelligence. As we go forward into that, and they become even more skilled at doing some of the emotional work that we do right now, we have to become ever more human. That is my positive view of the world, that it's a huge opportunity for us to become ever more human. And the more we work upon ourselves, and the more we go back to the way people were thinking 2,500 years ago about what it is to be a human, the more fit we are for the future. That's where my mind goes.
Wow.
But I'm an optimist.
Thank you so much, Deiric, for this wonderful insight, warmth, and attention to us. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Happy to.